$1,400. That's how much I paid for my first 240Hz OLED just over a year ago. And somehow just over a year since then, monitors like this one now exist, not only being literally half the price, but somehow more feature rich. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda ticked off this monitor didn't exist a year ago. And yeah, well, obviously it's not perfect, and I'm gonna go further in depth, of course, but to start, this is the Pixio PX277 OLED Max, which might surprise you with its spec sheet, coming in with a 27-inch 1440p OLED display, a 240Hz refresh rate, and a 0.03 millisecond response time. Huge thanks to Pixio for sending this out my way to check out in the first place, but with all of this in mind, what's the catch? Well, having played a crap ton of games on here over the last week and a bit, I'm hard pressed to find the compromise. Spoiler, obviously this thing isn't perfect and I'm going to touch on that shortly, but as somebody who's finally clawed their way back into Grandmasters on Overwatch 2, I jumped a total of 2 ranks playing competitively on this monitor. From an FPS standpoint, usually 24 or 27 inches is the sweet spot when it comes down to competitive gaming, so this being 27 inches fits right in. For myself at least, an OLED display at 240Hz has been my go-to for quite some time now, so popping off on this one comes easy in games like Overwatch, especially since again you have that 0.3 millisecond response time. And reaction-wise, honestly, everything is near instant and fluid during gameplay. From a competitive gaming standpoint, I'm not really seeing any compromises just yet with the image quality, especially since this is an OLED display. And while this doesn't have the NVIDIA or AMD branding, this does also have adaptive sync, so the frames are synced up to my GPU while gaming, meaning there's no tearing or skipped frames or anything like that. And it's not just competitive games too, because this has been really good for other games like Diablo 4 and Baldur's Gate 3. And while I don't particularly need a high refresh rate for RPGs, it's still definitely an improved experience, and gaming on here has been incredibly sharp. With a 1440p resolution, it's pretty much the sweet spot for a huge majority of gamers, since driving high refresh 4K does look a lot better, but it's way more expensive for both the display itself, as well as the systems that can actually run it. But gaming on here does look awesome regardless of what you're playing, and this monitor really is punching above its weight class. At the time of recording this video, this monitor does come in at $699, which again is half the price of the one I bought last year. And well, for somebody like me who still really digs console gaming apart from PC, this monitor does fit almost perfectly. I say almost, again, I'll touch on that in a sec, but at least when it comes down to my PlayStation 5, this still does make an incredible pairing. I've recently been diving into Helldivers 2, which is a great mix of incredible graphics, gameplay, and far from being too serious all at the same time. And despite the PlayStation 5 only going up to 120Hz at 1440p, the experience here is still incredible. Again, between this monitor or something a little bit more expensive, I'm sort of going to be getting the same experience regardless on my PlayStation 5, which definitely isn't a bad thing. Playing games like Spider-Man 2 or God of War Ragnarok is legitimately some of the best gaming within the last decade. And since this monitor does have a peak 1000 nits HDR brightness, it gets shown off pretty well in titles like these. Now, what makes this monitor not so perfect like I mentioned is that it is HDMI 2.0 as opposed to HDMI 2.1, so you unfortunately won't be getting VRR support, but depending on your games, you should still be able to lock either 60 or 120 FPS at 1440p. And I'll touch more on sound shortly, but this monitor does have a built-in set of speakers, which does make this a great option for console gaming since you don't really need anything else in your setup apart from the monitor and your console. And it's not just playing on my PlayStation 5 or my gaming PC either, since this monitor still has been a good option for all sorts of media and productivity. Since this is an OLED display, each individual pixel does turn on and off, which does give this display super punchy colors and literal blacks. And not that you'd really be seeing this display from the side or anything, but viewing angles do remain excellent as well, and the image still looks great. Regardless of what you're watching, the image is going to look awesome. Regardless of what you're playing, it's going to be the same thing, which is why OLED has been my preferred panel for the last year or so. But getting back to the built-in speakers, having watched a good chunk of content on here, while the speakers get plenty loud, they are rather hollow. For gaming or watching any sort of content, I can still recommend a headset or dedicated set of speakers through the audio jack. For myself, I'm using the Kanto U4s. The built-in speakers definitely won't beat out a set of dedicated speakers, of course, but they are definitely fine in a pinch. Not that a YouTube video will really match an in-person example, but here's a quick sound test. So yeah, plenty loud, but it could use a little bit more fullness. And as mentioned, even if you are stepping outside of content and gaming, this monitor has been good for everyday use. Having used this over the last week or so, it's been my main monitor when it comes down to my day job for accounting work and all my creation work for editing, color grading, and all that, and it's held up just fine. From a brightness standpoint, this monitor has been great in its HDR mode for editing this video, and it has plenty of range for my color grading. Likewise, text does look super sharp on here, which has been an issue for OLED panels in the past, and so far I haven't really noticed any sort of text fringing issues. In my setup at least, I'm using either my work issued ZBook for my accounting work or my M2 MacBook Air for all my creative work. Both of these do connect with a single Type-C cable to the built-in KVM, which swaps both my mouse and keyboard between my gaming PC and my laptop. For me, I'm using two wireless dongles, one for my NuFi Air 60 and my Corsair gaming mouse. This Type-C port does also give you that 65 watt power delivery, so it's not just laptops you might use. You can use this for charging peripherals, controllers, tablets, whatever else, you name it. And considering you typically need to buy a hub separate for that one cable connection or KVM, it's just nice to have this built right into your monitor. But to round out the other ports you have on this monitor, you do get one display 1.4, two HDMI 2.0s, and the two USB 2.0s for the KVM. Of course, there's that audio jack which you might use for a headset or speakers. And of course, since you might be using this for productivity like myself, you might rightfully be worried about burn-in. Well, for this monitor at least, there's more than a couple things you can do here to help prevent burn-in, starting with the actual heat of this monitor. Having pushed this monitor fully, I haven't really noticed it getting too hot to the touch, which is definitely a good sign. For cooling, this does have a passive setup by use of a custom heatsink, as well as a rear metal plate for that heat dissipation. Apart from that, inside the menus, you've got some OLED care options that can further help reduce the chance of burn-in. The menus don't really go into detail on what screen care is, but if it's anything like other monitors, this is probably some sort of pixel scrubbing technology. Apart from that, of course, you could always have static elements like your taskbar auto hide, or you can always have the automatic screensaver kick in whenever you're away from your desk. Apart from that, really, again, it's hard not to appreciate the build of this monitor considering the price point. While I'm typically team monitor arm for the huge adjustability, the built-in stand on here really does everything you need to do. The base is metal with a good heft, and the stand practically has full range of adjustments from height, pivot, tilt, and even full 90-degree rotation. There is also channeling through the center of the stand for your cable management, so kudos to Pixio for making a good stand. When it comes down to the build for the rest of the monitor, honestly it feels like a premium product. It has super thin bezels, a solid build, and RGB built in on the back end. The overall aesthetic from the front of this monitor is purely minimal as well, which is by far how I prefer my tech, and it really does look good in just about any setup. But with everything I've talked about for this monitor, to answer my original question, what's the catch? Why is this so much cheaper than other monitors? I think that comes down to a couple things. One probably being the fact that OLED panels have likely come down in price by quite a bit, and that Pixio is a bit of a newer brand having been founded in 2016. With that, apart from wanting HDMI 2.1 on here and some fuller speakers, I can't particularly say either of those would really be worth a huge massive jump in price. For anyone who's looking for their first or even a secondary OLED display, this is definitely an easy recommendation. It easily covers you for PC gaming, console gaming, creation work, any sort of professional work, and it does a good job. I don't know, if I'm missing something, let me know. It's a good monitor for the price that it is. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. I'll leave everything in my setup linked as well in the description. So I appreciate you watching till the end. Till next time.